Welcome to the NBA DFS build. I'm Kevin Roberts here to go over the showdown slate for the Mavericks and Celtics in game two of the NBA Finals. Should be hopefully a fun one. Game one was not very fun. You had to nail it right. Pretty much had to have Porzingis in the captain, although that wasn't always the case. Point is, Porzingis was definitely a key piece, low owned. People thought he was going to be limited, and indeed he was. I believe he played 21 minutes, but he crushed in that time, hitting basically every shot off the bench, 34 fantasy points. So didn't necessarily have to be the captain, but you definitely wanted him in your lineup, that's for sure. And then a lot of Mavs guys disappointed, which I was kind of alluding to going into the series. Obviously, I don't love Dallas's chance of winning the series. Boston's just a better team. They're stacked. They got the home court advantage. It's pretty arguable Dallas shouldn't even be here, but here we are. For showdown purposes, I don't really like to play for a blowout, and it is obviously a huge game for Dallas. So if they are going to at any point make this a series, this would be the game that they would win. So even if they don't win it, I would imagine they do keep it close a lot and play a lot better than they did in game one. Game one was a blowout early, they rallied, and then it was blowout late. So it did not go the way they wanted to at all. So I do think they'll adjust. I do think they'll be a little bit better. But honestly, it was like basically Luka, nobody else in game one, and that's going to have to change in a very big way. But let's get into it here. If this video helps you out in any way, please give it a like and also subscribe to the channel. Helps the channel grow, helps you get alerted to new videos, and lets me know that I'm helping you out too. And also, just feel free to chime into the comment section. Let us know anytime our videos help you out. I know for MLB, Taylor and I had a couple of good calls. He was all over the Mariners, 9 runs. They had 8 runs like really early. Like 7 runs in the first inning, I think it was. I liked the Royals. They had 10 runs. We both liked the Astros. They had 7 runs. I was really hesitant to eat the Lance Lynn chalk, and sure enough, he wasn't that good, and the Rockies had like 5 runs. So we did okay with MLB yesterday. Hopefully, it helped you out, and obviously, the plan is to keep it going again for NBA over the weekend here. All right, so honestly, right away, you can look at Luka and Tatum up top. I'm not going to break them down very much. You can absolutely captain them. They're just going to be the 2 highest owned captains, most likely. It's really hard to project ownership, especially for a showdown slate. And then just keep in mind, if you go play a single entry tournament, the ownership's just going to be, inflated. Like if we think Luka is going to be 20 to 25% owned in the captain slot in, big tournaments, then in a showdown slate, he might be like 35, 40% owned. You never know. Just keep that in mind. But yeah, Tatum and Luka look awesome. I prefer Luka as far as like a raw points play. He does have the best projection by 8 fantasy points. That's obviously considerable. They're both gonna be really chalky. Luka coming in at 66% owned, and Tatum at 53%. I'm probably just gonna pair them both for the most part. If I'm doing one lineup, I'm gonna slide them both to utility and pair them together, and not really think twice about it. Um, you can captain them. I have no problem with that. If I'm doing a lot of labs, I absolutely will captain them both quite a bit. But just as a rule of thumb for me, especially with NBA showdown slates, I like to just slide that stud that you know is going to do well, but you hope doesn't do so well that you need him in captain. I slide him over to utility, and I just try to get a little bit different. I don't think you need to get super different every single time. Like you don't need to go get a punt play so you can afford Luka and Tatum, but the fact that you're not putting them in captain frees up so much cash that I don't think you need to do that. That said, I do like them both quite a bit, and I will be putting them both into my captain slot here. I'll even do it on the side here while I'm going. So right away, I have 6.1K left to mess with. My cat's meowing. I don't know if you heard that in the background. Anyways, let's keep going. So Kyrie Irving is the next guy up as far as raw projection goes with 38 fantasy points, which is a little bit interesting considering the game he had in game one. He was not good. 6 for 19 shooting, 12 actual points. And the thing I've been saying about him really all playoffs long is, even if he goes off and gets like 30 plus real points, the ceiling isn't really that amazing just because he doesn't really get the peripheral stats like somebody like Tatum and obviously Luka to a high level would get. That said, this is such a huge narrative game for him going against a Boston team that he played for. And I think I saw some stat where he's like 0-11 or something in his last 11 games against the Celtics. Something crazy like that. I can't remember what it was, but the point is it hasn't been good. Obviously facing Drew Holiday and even Derek White to a lesser degree, it's not a good matchup. But Kyrie Irving has the ability to pop off in an arguably tougher matchup against a very, very good Minnesota defense. Irving scored 30 plus points 3 different times and 20 plus points 4 different times in that series. So he had a lot of success in a very tough spot. So he has the ability to adjust and crush again. So I think I think he's okay for utility. But where I would really like to look at him is probably the captain spot, just because I don't think he's going to be, super chalky there. I think people are just there's going to be recency bias for sure, where the ownership just dips a little bit. He's coming in at 48% owned overall, which I think is going to be third highest, which feels a little bit high. If that's going to be the case for the utility, I'll probably shy away from him a little bit there. I'll still get ownership for sure, but I would be underweight in the utility. But the captain slot is where my guess is he would have lower ownership. Especially obviously related to Luka and Tatum, but I just don't think he's going to be the third highest owned captain. So I think he's very intriguing for captain. He's fine for utility, but at his price at 9K flat, second most expensive play, right behind Jaylen Brown after obviously the top 2 dudes. He's fine, but I just think he's more. It's more advantageous to play him in the captain slot if you're going to play him. Jaylen Brown, I think, is the better play. I think he's $600 more at utility. He just feels safer. He's got a better floor. He just does more. He just does more stuff. When he had a crazy 40-point game, I guess 4 games ago, he only had 52 fantasy points. So that is kind of a shout to that. Maybe he's similar to Kyrie in that vein. But I mean, last game, 22 real points, 44 fantasy points. Game before, 29 real points, 48 fantasy points. So he can get rebounds and he can rack up assists and steals and stuff. So in last game, game 1, 3 blocks. He was all over it, like defending inside, which was really weird, but cool to see. But yeah, I just think he's got a better floor and similar ceiling, to be honest. So if I'm looking at utility and I'm stuck in that 9K range, I'm playing Jaylen over Kyrie. And I think Jaylen is a fine captain play. Once we get captain ownership, if Kyrie is the lesser owned guy, I would prefer him in captain. But I just think if you're going for 2 guys who are going to be kind of chalky, and if you have to make a call in the utility spot, I think Jaylen is the safer play, especially for like cash lineups. Drew Holiday is just the bane of my existence, man. I mean, like, I cannot get this guy right. It's not even just that he's not even like going off. He's had 31 and 32 fantasy points in his last 2 games. He hasn't topped 38 fantasy points in any of his last 4 games. But he's just good enough that if I don't have him in my showdown lineup, it's like kind of burning me. It's super annoying. The only good thing is a lot of the times I've been saying it's basically him versus Derek White for me. And honestly, it's worked out pretty well because except for last game. In last game, Drew had 31 and Derek White had 27. So that was a loss for me. But honestly, every other game, Derek White, except for that crazy game where Drew had like 54 fantasy points, Derek White's been the better play. He's been a little bit more expensive, but aside from pairing them together, Derek White over Drew has been good so far. And I'm just gonna make that my calling card again here. He's 7.2K, Drew is 6.6. I prefer him in the utility slot. I think you can pair them. It just, I can't imagine them both going off in the same game, especially with Porzingis back. Drew just always wasn't a high usage guy, and with Porzingis healthy, his usage is just going to decline a little bit. I think both are fine in the captain slot. I just don't think they really give you the ceiling to feel amazing about them there. And I think it gets you different enough. But I just prefer a little bit more ceiling, or I want to get cheaper so I can just load up on the utility slot. If I can find a cheap play that I feel can be comparable to those guys. So if Derek White and Drew Holiday get what they did in game 1, which is 27 to 31, and you feel confident about that in the captain slot, why can't I just go down and get PJ Washington for cheaper, Al Horford, Derek Lively, Derek Jones, Daniel Gafford? So like those guys, I think, feel a little bit more appealing slide into the captain slot when you start talking about price points and projections and like what they can get. So right now, Derek White is coming in at 32 fantasy points for projection, and Drew's at 30. And then you have, Porzingis is actually kind of expensive at 8.6K, so that's not a good comparison, just because his minutes limit is still there. But PJ Washington gets monster minutes, and he's cheaper than both those guys, and his projection's not that far off at 24 points. So right away, PJ Washington feels like a pretty interesting pivot off of either of these guys, just because I don't really want to pair them together anyways. So you could play Derek and then pivot off of Drew to PJ Washington. I mean, PJ Washington's coming in at 34% utility ownership, which is comparable to what Derek White and Drew Holiday come in at. But as far as like sliding into the captain, you save a little bit more money with PJ. And I continue to go back to PJ, man. He had some huge games in the previous two series. And even last game, I liked him a lot. He was not bad. He had 14 real points and 8 rebounds in 36 minutes. It just didn't translate because he didn't have enough other peripherals. He didn't hit any threes, and he didn't get the double-double. He is getting there, man. He is close to hitting that big game and paying off. So I'm going to continue to get some exposure to him in the captain slot. He's not going to be owned there. And if you just land on him in utility at 6.2K, I think that's totally fine. Obviously, I like him a lot at that price. He's going to continue to get the minutes, and he's playing well. He just needs to play a little bit better and be a little bit more productive to be a smash for us. Al Horford obviously is going to be impacted by the return of Porzingis. It didn't really hurt him in game one. He had 28 fantasy points in 30 minutes. I mean, he doesn't look great out there, but he's still racking up stats. In his last 5 games, he's had 28 plus fantasy points. 4 out of 5 games, he's getting it done. So at 5.6K, Al Horford's totally fine. I don't have a problem with him at all. He's not even that chalky, 28%, and that's because Porzingis is back. I wouldn't put Al Horford at the captain, but crazier things have happened. I mean, we've had slates where obviously Drew Holiday and guys like Jaden McDaniels and Andrew Nembhard were captain winners. So, I mean, you can play anybody in captain. I'll say it every single time I do a showdown breakdown. You can. So you can play Al Horford. He's not going to be owned in the captain. Save a little bit of money and slide him in there and help you out if you want to. Not really a priority play for me whatsoever, though, but he is cheap and he should play about 30 minutes, even with Porzingis back. But if I'm going to go there, like in that range, I prefer Derek Lively at 5K or Daniel Gafford at 4.6. Gafford played only 14 minutes in the first game. Obviously, there's a blowout there, and he's splitting time with Lively. But he was reasonably effective offensively, 8 points, 3 rebounds in 14 minutes. So hopefully that can change a little bit and he can be a little bit more productive and stay out there longer. Obviously, it's a little bit risky, but if we can get a ceiling game on Daniel Gafford, he is captain viable. And at 4.6K, sliding the utility is like super easy to get to him. And he's not even that chalky at 29% at the moment. I like Derek Lively more, though, just because he's coming off the bench. It will be interesting to see if the Celtics make like a dramatic shift here and start Porzingis. I don't see why they need to. He came off the bench in game one and everything worked out Boston's way in game one. So if I were Boston, I would change nothing. I would keep Porzingis off the bench. And if that happened, then basically Lively is being matched up with Porzingis the whole game. And he had 5 fouls in game one, which just took him out of the game completely. And he only played 18 minutes. So if Porzingis doesn't start and Lively is coming in and immediately facing Porzingis, that is a little bit troubling. So I'd keep an eye on that. If Porzingis starts and Lively doesn't have to, mess with him immediately every single time, I'd feel a little bit better than about him at 5K. But I like him anyways. He's a really good per minute guy. He was playing very, very well in the Minnesota series. He had, let me check him out again. He had in the Minnesota series, like every game but one where he got injured and only played 9 minutes, he had over 28 fantasy points. And in the game he got injured, he had 14 fantasy points in 9 minutes. He was doing that against Cat and Rudy Gobert. What is so great about Porzingis or Horford that we can't believe that this ascension on a Lively can continue? I think it can. Obviously he struggled in game one. I think Dallas as a whole is going to adjust and figure it out and play a little bit better. So at 5K flat, I think Lively is really interesting, especially since recency bias could get people off of him. And right now he's coming at 36% utility ownership. So he's a fun little sprinkling for the captain play and a solid value at 5K flat. Again, a little worried that the matchup is, a little tough for him with Porzingis off the bench right away. But it's the NBA. These guys are pros. I'm not so concerned about it that I wouldn't play him or anything like that. Not really excited about the Boston value, so I'm not really going to look at Peyton Pritchard, 3.2K, 16 minutes in game one, but that was mostly because of blowout. He'd been losing his minutes in the previous series. The last game, he had 9 minutes. in a close game. So that doesn't feel great. If you think it's going to be a blowout or, lopsided, obviously like game one, you could go and see if you can get Pritchard for 15 minutes at 3.2K, but I'd rather just go use the Dallas guys. Josh Green at 2.8K feels like a better value. He had 20 minutes in game one, even with the blowout, and he'd been playing 17 plus minutes in like each of the last 5 games here. So he has a pretty decent established role off the bench. And where is he at here? He's projected for 17 minutes. I'm okay with that. 17 minutes of Josh Green, and probably more if the game can stay close. Jaden Hardy is a little bit deceiving to me. He did end up getting 11 minutes, and he had 13 points with 18 fantasy points, but that was because of a blowout. I don't know how sustainable that would be in a game that's a little bit tighter. He still has had a role, 8+ minutes in like every game since game 3 of the OKC series. Just if he doesn't hit his shots, he's not going to be very productive. So at 2.4K, you can definitely do it because that's super cheap for a guy who might play 10 to 15 minutes. But I just prefer Maxi Kleber at 2.2K. He's just a safer play. 19 minutes in game 1. It was not productive at all. 5 fantasy points, no rebounds. Come on, dude, 7-footer. But I'll take the chance and roll the dice on Kleber every time over Jaden Hardy. I just feel like Jaden Hardy it's like not sustainable. It's not trustworthy. But Kleber, 19 minutes in a blowout, absolutely. They need his size. They need his shooting. They need his rebounding. So I think he's an awesome value. What's his ownership coming in at? 19%. That's gross. Like he's so low owned. I don't understand. So I think a very, very small percentage in the captain would be interesting just to see how much you can load this up and if Kleber can just like show up for them like in a big way. I mean, he had some big splash games for them during the regular season too, and he just struggled to stay healthy this year. But he can hit threes, he can get blocks, he can get rebounds. If he can deliver here in what could be pushing for 25, 30 minutes in a close game, honestly, he looks really, really appealing. So 2.2K, he's like a lock for me. That is an auto value play for me in the utility. And I do like him a tiny bit. You know me, I don't like to go and play punt plays in the captain slot just because it can go wrong like immediately and then your night's just over. But he's like one of the few punts here that I actually have a little bit of interest in the captain slot. Definitely more than Jaden Hardy. Definitely more than Sam Hauser. Even though he did get 16 minutes at 2.6K, you can play Sam Hauser. I just don't feel great about it. But yeah, a quick recap for the value here. I think Pritchard, Hauser, those guys are fine. Hardy is okay if you want to, but I definitely like Josh Green over all those guys. And Kleber is my favorite value by miles and miles. All right, so here's the deal for me. I'm still on that PJ Washington train. I'm going to sprinkle him into my captain slot. I like him at 6.2K for utility quite a bit. I think I'm just going to split the ownership on Lively and Gafford, and just half my lineups are probably going to suck, and then the other half will have the guy that hits. And then Luka and Tatum are basically locked into my lineups. I'm switching them out for captain, and I'm definitely playing them a ton in utility. And then I'm going to play around with my captain slot with being overweight on Kyrie. I'll probably still get a little bit of exposure to those mid-range guys like Drew, PJ, Derek White. And then I will get a tiny, tiny bit of Kleber in there at the captain, and maybe even Derek Lively. But that is mostly my strategy. And it really just depends on what you want to do. If you want to do a single entry lineup, I don't think I would go with Kleber in the captain. I would probably go with either Luka or Tatum, or just do like a slight deviation and play somebody like, Kyrie or maybe even Porzingis. Which, by the way, I don't ever like to go through a showdown and then like after I'm done and I publish, I'm like, oh shit, I didn't touch on this one dude that I totally should have talked about. Porzingis. That's the main guy I haven't talked about yet. So I'm going to take a stand on Porzingis. Number one, he's pretty expensive for a guy who only played 21 minutes in the first game and came off the bench. I don't like that. So after seeing how effective he was, I think he's still in play, and he's probably still going to be really low owned in the captain slot. Right now, he's only coming in with 32% ownership in general. So, I mean, as far as just GPP showdown, YOLO, you can play Porzingis 100%. But if they're still going to take him off the bench, if they're still going to limit him, and there's a chance that he's not as efficient as he was in game one. I mean, he shot 8 for 13. and he had 3 blocks, and he was just crushing. So obviously that could continue, but I'm just going to bet that it won't. Usually I would reserve a leverage play like that, like a big stand like that, for if a guy's chalky, and I will look at the updated ownership on like Saturday or even on Sunday too before the game and see where it's at. My guess is because of his game one, that ownership's going to take up. So I don't want any part of that. And honestly, he's just kind of pricey. So in that price range, I'm kind of looking at Kyrie, kind of looking at Jaylen. Obviously, I have a lot of interest in Luka and Tatum. I just don't feel like there's an easy, comfortable path to get to Porzingis, which makes him a great GPP play, but just not a priority for me in game 2. All right, so that's going to do it for me. Hopefully, all of that helps you out a little bit. Hopefully, it kind of highlights the top plays, which are obvious. I think at a very high level, Tatum and Luka are just smash plays. And then the other guys, it's just kind of like, who do you like the most, and do you want to play the ownership game, and who are you going to slide into your captain? You now have my ideas as far as what I want to do. You can go against that if you want. You can kind of play your own play with your own process and mix my advice if you're running a lot of lineups. And of course, use a lineup optimizer like Roto Grinders or something like that you trust and you feel like you can kind of manipulate and exploit to to your advantage if you're entering a lot of contests. Anyways, hopefully it helped. If it did, please give this video a like and also consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching and good luck.